David pulled his old baseball cap down a little lower as he stepped through the glass door of Brew and Bean Coffee House. The familiar smell of freshly ground coffee beans hit him immediately, and for a moment, he just stood there breathing it in. This was his place. He'd built it from nothing 5 years ago with his last bit of savings and a whole lot of hope. But today, he wasn't here as the owner. Today, he was just another customer in line. It had been almost 3 weeks since he'd actually set foot in this location. 3 weeks of being pulled in a dozen different directions, managing the 2 new shops across town, dealing with suppliers, handling paperwork that never seemed to end. His manager, Linda, kept telling him everything was fine here. The numbers looked good on paper. Sales were steady. Staff turnover was low. Everything seemed perfect from his office desk. But something had been nagging at him. Maybe it was the way Linda's voice sounded just a little too cheerful on their phone calls. Or maybe it was the fact that he couldn't remember the last time he'd actually made a cup of coffee himself. When did he become the kind of business owner who only looked at spreadsheets instead of talking to real people? So here he was, wearing jeans and an old sweater, looking like any other tired person who needed their morning caffeine fix. The line was longer than he expected for a Tuesday morning. That was good, he thought. Business was clearly doing well. He counted 8 people ahead of him, most of them tapping away at their phones or staring blankly at the menu board behind the counter. He recognized a few faces. There was the elderly man who always ordered a small black coffee and sat by the window reading his newspaper, and that woman in the business suit who used to chat with him about her kids back when he worked the morning shift himself. She didn't recognize him now. Why would she? He'd been gone so long. David let his eyes wander around the space. The exposed brick walls still looked good. He'd spent 2 full weekends scrubbing and sealing them himself when he first opened. The artwork from local painters hung in the same spots, though he noticed one frame was slightly crooked. The wooden tables and mismatched chairs gave the place that comfortable lived-in feeling he'd always wanted, not like those corporate coffee chains where everything looked the same. This was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be special. The morning sunlight streamed through the large front windows, creating patterns on the worn hardwood floors. He'd refinished those floors himself too, back when every dollar mattered and hiring help wasn't an option. His back had ached for a week afterward, but he'd been proud of the result. Behind the counter, 2 baristas were working the morning rush. David recognized them both, though he wasn't sure they'd recognize him. The younger guy, probably in his early 20s, had been working here for several months. David remembered interviewing him, remembered how nervous the kid had been, how he'd talked about saving up for college. What was his name again? It bothered David that he couldn't remember immediately. The other barista was newer. A woman, maybe late 20s, with her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She moved with the kind of confidence that came from food service experience. David had only met her once, briefly, during her interview about 2 months ago. He'd been rushing between meetings that day and had mostly left the hiring to Linda. When did he start doing that? When did he stop being involved in every decision? The line shuffled forward slowly. The espresso machine hissed and steamed, creating that background noise that David had always found comforting. It was the sound of his dream coming to life, the sound that meant people wanted what he'd created. He watched the 2 baristas work together. They had a rhythm, moving around each other smoothly in the small space behind the counter. The guy handled the register while the woman worked the espresso machine. They seemed efficient enough, professional. But something felt off, and David couldn't quite put his finger on it. Maybe it was the way they moved, mechanical, going through the motions. Where was the warmth he'd always insisted on? Where were the smiles, the small conversations with customers, the personal touches that made people feel like they were part of something? A woman ahead of him in line ordered a complicated drink, something with oat milk and caramel and an extra shot. The young barista didn't even blink, just punched it into the register and called out the order. No comment about trying something new, no recommendation, no connection. When had his coffee shop become just another transaction? David shifted his weight from one foot to the other, 3 people ahead of him now. He could hear snippets of conversation from the customers around him. Someone complaining about traffic. Someone else on a phone call about a work deadline. Normal morning stuff. But he used to know these people. He used to know that the man in the gray jacket was named Robert, and he was worried about his daughter's college applications. He used to know that the young woman checking her watch was always rushing to make it to her nursing shift at the hospital. Now they were just faces in line. The gap between him and the counter was getting smaller. 2 people now. David found himself feeling oddly nervous. This was his own shop, for crying out loud. Why did he feel like an outsider? Because maybe he was one now. Maybe that was the truth he'd been avoiding. He'd started Brew & Bean because he loved coffee, sure, but more than that, he loved people. He loved the conversations, the regular customers who became friends, the sense of community that grew around a good local coffee shop. He'd wanted to create a place where people felt welcomed, where the baristas knew your name and your usual order, where you could sit and work or read or just exist without feeling rushed. Had he lost all of that while chasing growth? One person ahead of him now, an older woman ordering tea and a muffin. David watched as the barista handed over her change without even looking up, already focused on the next order. The woman stood there for just a second, as if expecting something more, then moved aside with a small frown. That bothered David more than he wanted to admit. Then he heard it. The young guy behind the counter speaking in a low voice to the woman working beside him. David was close enough now to catch the words, though they clearly thought no one was listening. I'm telling you, Mr. Chen has no idea what actually happens here anymore. David froze. Mr. Chen. That was him. They were talking about him. His first instinct was to speak up, to announce himself. But something made him stay quiet. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear of what else he might hear. He kept his head down, pretending to study his phone like everyone else in line, but his ears were sharp now, catching every word. He's too busy with his other locations to care about this one, the young barista continued, his voice carrying just a hint of bitterness. The woman glanced around nervously and David held his breath, keeping his face hidden under the brim of his cap. Keep your voice down, she whispered. Linda could hear you. David's heart was pounding now. What exactly was happening in his coffee shop? And more importantly, what else didn't he know? The customer ahead of him finished ordering and stepped aside. It was his turn now. The young barista looked up and David felt the moment hanging in the air like a question mark, waiting to see what would happen next. David stood there at the counter, his heart beating so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The young barista was looking right at him now, waiting for his order, completely unaware that the boss he'd just been complaining about was standing 3 feet away. Can I help you? The guy asked, his tone professional but flat, empty. Like he'd said those same 4 words 1,000 times that morning. David cleared his throat. Yeah, just a large Americano, please. For here or to go? To go. The barista punched buttons on the register without really looking at David's face. That'll be $4.50. David handed over a $5 bill, and as the barista made change, David could hear the woman barista behind him talking to another customer. But his attention was still locked on the young guy in front of him, the one who'd just said David didn't care about this place anymore. Thanks, David mumbled, taking his change and stepping aside to wait for his drink. He moved to the pickup area at the end of the counter, positioning himself near enough to hear but far enough not to be obvious. His mind was racing. Part of him wanted to pull off his cap right now and ask what was going on. But another part of him, the part that was already feeling guilty about being absent, wanted to hear more, needed to hear more. Because if this is what his employees really thought, if this is what they said when they didn't think he was listening, then maybe he had a much bigger problem than he'd realized. The morning rush continued around him. The espresso machine hissed and gurgled. Orders were called out. Customers came and went. And David stood there, invisible in his plain clothes and old cap, waiting. The 2 baristas worked in relative silence for a few minutes, focused on the line of customers. But as the crowd thinned slightly, David heard the young guy speak again, his voice low but clear enough. Look, I'm just saying we're the ones keeping this place running. We show up every single day, deal with all the difficult customers, clean up the messes, and for what? The woman barista glanced over her shoulder nervously. I know, but But nothing, he continued, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. We barely make enough to cover rent. Meanwhile, Mr. Chen's probably sitting in some fancy office somewhere, counting his money. David felt his face grow hot. That wasn't fair. That wasn't fair at all. He'd just raised everyone's base pay 2 months ago. He'd added health insurance, which cost him a fortune every month. He'd set up profit sharing so everyone got bonuses when the shops did well. Didn't that count for anything? But standing here now, anonymous and invisible, he realized something uncomfortable. None of that mattered if his employees didn't feel valued in the ways that really counted. I heard he drives a Tesla now, the woman added quietly, and David could hear something in her voice. Not quite anger, but disappointment maybe. Must be nice. David wanted to laugh, except nothing about this was funny. That Tesla wasn't new. It was 4 years old, and he'd bought it used after his ancient Honda finally died on the highway. He'd looked at the price and almost backed out 3 times before finally signing the paperwork. And he still felt guilty about it, like he was being too extravagant when he should be putting that money back into the business. He lived in the same small apartment he'd had since before Brew and Bean even existed. His furniture was mostly second-hand. He hadn't taken a real vacation in 3 years. Every extra dollar went back into the business, into making it better, into taking care of his employees. But they didn't know that, did they? How could they? He was never here anymore to show them. Next customer, please, the young barista called out, and David watched as an older gentleman stepped up to order. While that transaction happened, the woman barista started working on David's Americano. She moved with practiced efficiency, pulling the espresso shots, adding hot water, snapping the lid on the cup. She called out large Americano in a bored voice, and David stepped forward to take it. Their eyes met for just a second, and David wondered if she saw anything familiar in his face. But her expression stayed neutral, already moving on to the next drink order. David took his coffee and moved toward a small table in the corner, one partially hidden by a large potted plant. He needed to think. He needed to understand what was really happening here. He sat down and pretended to check his phone, but really he was watching and listening. The morning crowd was starting to thin out now. A few people sat scattered around the shop with their laptops and books. The 2 baristas had a small break in orders, and that's when the conversation continued. My roommate works at Sterling Coffee downtown, the young barista said, leaning against the back counter. They start their people at $18 an hour. 18. And their owner actually talks to them, actually knows their names and asks about their lives. David felt something twist in his stomach. He'd started everyone above minimum wage. He'd thought that was good, thought that was being fair. But apparently Sterling Coffee was paying more. Why didn't he know this? Why hadn't anyone told him? The woman barista sighed. When was the last time Mr. Chen was even here? Actually here, working with us? The young guy thought for a moment. 3 weeks? Maybe 4? And even then he just went straight to the back office with Linda. Didn't even say hi to anyone. Had it really been that long? David tried to remember his last visit. He'd come in to drop off some paperwork, and Linda had needed him to sign a bunch of forms. And there'd been a problem with a vendor that needed immediate attention, and then he'd gotten a call about the new location and had to rush out. He hadn't said hi to the staff. He'd been too busy, too rushed, too focused on everything else. When had he stopped seeing the people right in front of him? I remember when this place first opened, the woman said, her voice softer now. My sister used to work here, actually. She said Mr. Chen knew everyone's name, asked about their families, stayed late to help clean up. He made it feel like a real team, you know? What happened? The young barista asked. Same thing that always happens, she replied with a shrug. Success, growth. The business got bigger and the owner got more distant. Tale as old as time. David stared down at his untouched coffee. Is that what he'd become? Just another owner who'd forgotten why he started in the first place? He thought about those early days. Working 16-hour shifts because he couldn't afford to hire enough help. Learning everyone's coffee preferences by heart, staying after close to talk with his small staff about their days, their dreams, their problems. He'd thrown birthday parties in the shop. He'd given advances on paychecks when people had emergencies. He'd been there. And somewhere along the way, in the pursuit of building something bigger, he'd lost the thing that made it special to begin with. You know what the worst part is? The young barista said, and David looked up sharply. What? I actually liked working here at first. Really liked it. The vibe was good, the customers were nice, and I thought maybe this could be more than just another job. But now, he shook his head. Now it just feels like every other corporate place. Clock in, do your shift, clock out. Nobody cares if you're having a bad day. Nobody notices if you stay late to help. It's just empty. The word hit David like a punch to the gut. Empty. His dream, the thing he'd poured his heart and soul into, felt empty to the people working there. A new customer walked in, and the two baristas straightened up, putting on their professional faces. The conversation ended as abruptly as it had started. David sat there for a long moment, his coffee growing cold in his hands. He'd come here today thinking he might find some small problems to fix. Maybe the schedule needed adjusting, or maybe they needed a new piece of equipment. He hadn't expected to find out that he was the problem. The question was, what was he going to do about it? He could walk out right now, pretend he'd never heard any of this. He could fire the young barista for talking badly about the boss. He could get defensive and list all the things he'd done for his employees, all the ways he'd tried to take care of them, or he could do something he hadn't done in a long time. He could listen. David pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Linda. Need to talk to you and the two morning baristas. Can you arrange a meeting during their break? It's important. And Linda, this isn't about discipline. It's about me finally paying attention. He hit send before he could change his mind. Then he sat back, took a sip of his now lukewarm coffee, and waited to see if he could fix what he'd broken. 20 minutes felt like an eternity. David sat at his corner table, pretending to scroll through his phone while his mind raced through every decision he'd made over the past year. Every time he'd chosen a spreadsheet over a conversation. Every time he'd sent an email instead of showing up in person. Every time he'd assumed everything was fine because the numbers looked good. His phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Done, they're on break in 10 minutes. Meeting in the back room. Is everything okay? David typed back quickly. It will be, thanks. He watched as the morning rush finally died down completely. A couple of college students sat in the corner with their laptops. An elderly woman read a book by the window. The place had that mid-morning quiet that David used to love. That peaceful lull between the chaos of the morning rush and the lunch crowd. Linda emerged from the back room, and David could see her scanning the shop. He pulled off his baseball cap and caught her eye. Her face went from confused to shocked in about half a second. She hurried over to his table. David, what are you doing here? And why are you dressed like... She gestured at his casual outfit. Did something happen? Yeah, David said quietly. Something happened. I've been standing in line like a regular customer, and I overheard some things I needed to hear. Linda's face went pale. Oh no, what kind of things? The kind of things people say when they think the boss isn't listening. He stood up. Come on, let's go talk to them. David, if this is about complaints I can handle. It's not about complaints, he interrupted gently. It's about me finally doing what I should have been doing all along, listening. They walked toward the back room together. Through the small window in the door, David could see the two baristas sitting at the break table. The young guy was scrolling through his phone, and the woman was eating what looked like a granola bar. They both looked tired. When David and Linda walked in, the young barista looked up casually, then did a double take. His phone clattered onto the table. The woman stopped mid-chew, her eyes going wide. Mr. Chen, the young guy stammered, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. I didn't know you were... we weren't expecting... His face had gone completely white. David could practically see the realization dawning, the memory of everything he'd said in the past hour crashing over him like a wave. Sit down, David said, pulling out a chair for himself. Please, both of you. They sat, but they looked like they wanted to bolt for the door. The woman's granola bar sat forgotten on the table in front of her. Linda stood near the door, her arms crossed, looking concerned. David took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment where he could either make things worse or start making them better. So, he began, keeping his voice calm and steady. I was in line this morning, wearing this. He gestured to his casual clothes. And I heard some things. Things about me, about this place, about how you both feel working here. The young barista looked like he might be sick. Mr. Chen, I am so sorry. I was just venting, and I didn't mean... David held up his hand. Stop, I'm not here to fire you. I'm not here to yell at you or punish you or make you feel worse than you clearly already do. The two baristas exchanged confused glances. "I'm here because you were right," David continued. "About almost everything you said. I haven't been here. I don't know what's happening day to day anymore. I've been so focused on growing the business that I forgot about the people who actually make it work." The woman found her voice. "But we shouldn't have talked about you like that. It was unprofessional and it was honest," David said. "Maybe not in the way you would have said it to my face, but it was honest. And I need honest right now more than I need professional." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them truthfully. No sugarcoating, no trying to make me feel better. Can you do that?" They both nodded slowly, still looking uncertain. "Good." David looked at the young barista first. "What's your name?" "And I'm asking because I'm ashamed to say I can't remember even though I know I hired you." "Tyler," the guy said quietly. "I've been here 8 months." 8 months, David repeated, feeling that shame sink deeper. "And you mentioned you're saving for college. What are you studying?" Tyler looked surprised by the question. "Business management. I want to run my own place someday, maybe a restaurant or a bar. That's actually why I applied here. I thought working at a small business would teach me things. And has it?" David asked. Tyler hesitated, then seemed to remember David had asked for honesty. "At first, yeah. Linda's great at managing the daily stuff. But lately it feels more like just another job. I don't really understand how decisions get made or why we do things certain ways. I'm just following orders," David nodded, taking that in. He turned to the woman. "And you?" "Rachel," she said. "I've been here about 2 months. You mentioned your sister used to work here?" Rachel nodded. "Yeah, like 3 years ago when you first opened. She loved it. That's why I applied when I saw the job posting. She said you created this amazing environment where everyone felt valued. But when I got here," she trailed off. "It wasn't what you expected," David finished for her. "I don't want to sound ungrateful," Rachel said quickly. "The pay is okay and Linda is really nice and the work itself is fine. It's just, I don't know. It feels like something's missing." David sat back in his chair. Those words again, empty, something missing. 2 different people, same feeling. "Tyler, you mentioned Sterling Coffee pays better," David said. "Why are you still here? Why haven't you quit?" Tyler seemed surprised by the question. He thought about it for a moment. "Honestly? Because Linda's a good boss and I like most of the regular customers. And I guess I keep hoping it'll go back to how my friend described it when he used to work here, back when you were around more." "What would make you want to stay long term?" David asked. "Not just until college, but really commit to being here?" Tyler glanced at Rachel, then back at David. "I guess, feeling like I matter? Like I'm not just a body filling a shift. And maybe understanding the business side of things, learning how it all works. That's what I really wanted when I took this job." David looked at Rachel. "What about you? What would make this place better?" Rachel bit her lip, clearly nervous. "Can I really say anything?" "Please," David said. "I need to hear it." "The schedule is killing me," she admitted. "I told Linda when I interviewed that I needed morning shifts because the buses stop running near my apartment after 10. But I keep getting put on closing shifts and I have to pay for a rideshare home, which eats up like 2 hours of wages every time. I've mentioned it twice, but nothing's changed." David turned to Linda. "Did you know about this?" Linda looked uncomfortable. "I put in a request to change her schedule through the new system you set up, but it keeps getting flagged as inefficient because we need experienced closers. The software won't let me override it without manager approval from you, and you've been so busy with the other locations, I didn't want to bother you with something small." Something small? David felt his frustration rising, but not at Linda. At himself, at the stupid system he'd put in place. Rachel having to choose between her safety and her job isn't small, Linda. Nothing about our employees' well-being is small. He ran his hand through his hair, suddenly seeing everything clearly. He'd tried to make things more efficient, more streamlined, more professional, and in the process he'd made it impossible for the people on the ground to solve simple human problems. "What else?" David asked, looking between Tyler and Rachel. "What else isn't working?" They exchanged glances again, and David could see them weighing whether to really open up. "The freezer's been broken for a week," Tyler said finally. "We've been having to run to the convenience store down the block twice a day to buy bags of ice. It adds like 30 minutes to our prep time. Linda reported it, Rachel added quickly. Twice, but I guess it hasn't been fixed yet. David looked at Linda, who nodded. I sent 2 emails and left a voicemail with the repair company information. I was waiting for approval on the repair cost. How much? David asked. $300. David closed his eyes. $300. He'd just spent $5,000 on new signs for the other locations. But a $300 repair that affected daily operations, that needed his personal approval, and he'd been too busy to even check those emails. This is on me, David said, opening his eyes and looking at all 3 of them. All of it. The schedule problems, the broken equipment, the feeling that nobody's listening. It's all on me. I built systems that made it harder for you to do your jobs. I got so caught up in growing the business that I stopped caring for the people who make it work. Tyler and Rachel were staring at him like they'd never seen a boss admit to being wrong before. So here's what's going to change, David continued, starting right now. David pulled out his phone and started making notes as he talked. First thing, that freezer gets fixed today, not tomorrow, not next week. Today. I'm calling the repair company myself as soon as we're done here, and if they can't come today, I'll find someone who can. He looked up at Tyler and Rachel, who were watching him with cautious hope in their eyes. Second thing, Rachel, you're on morning shifts, starting immediately. Linda, I don't care what the scheduling software says. If it can't handle basic human needs, then we're not using it anymore. We'll figure out the closing shift coverage another way. Linda nodded, pulling out her own phone to make notes. I can move some people around. It might take a day or 2, but I'll make it work. Third thing, David continued, his momentum building now. Tyler, you said you wanted to learn the business side of things. How would you feel about shadowing me 1 day a week? Not just here, but seeing how everything works. Meeting with suppliers, looking at the books, understanding the decisions that go into running this place. Tyler's eyes widened. Seriously? You'd let me do that? Why wouldn't I? David asked. You want to run your own place someday? I'd rather teach you the right way to do it than have you figure it out the hard way like I did. Besides, maybe having you around will keep me honest, keep me from losing sight of what matters. He could see Tyler trying to hold back a smile, trying to stay professional but failing. It reminded David of himself at that age, hungry to learn, eager to prove himself. But here's the thing, David said, his voice getting more serious. These are just band-aids, quick fixes for immediate problems. The real issue is bigger than a broken freezer or a messed-up schedule. What do you mean? Rachel asked. David set his phone down on the table. I built this place because I loved the connection, the community, the feeling that we were all in this together. And somewhere along the way I forgot that. I started treating it like just another business instead of remembering it's made up of real people with real lives. He looked at Linda. You've been holding this place together and I've been taking that for granted, expecting you to handle everything while I go off chasing expansion and growth. That's not fair to you. Linda shook her head. David, I signed up for this job. I knew what it involved. But you shouldn't have to wait for my approval on a $300 repair, David insisted. You shouldn't have to leave voicemails and send emails hoping I'll notice. You're the manager. You should be able to make those calls. He turned back to Tyler and Rachel. And you two shouldn't feel like you're just cogs in a machine. You should feel like you're part of something that matters. Because you are. This place doesn't exist without you. The back room was quiet for a moment. David could hear the muffled sounds of the coffee shop beyond the door. The hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of customer voices, the clink of cups and spoons. The sounds of his dream, still alive, but in need of some serious care. So here's what I'm proposing, David said. I want to create a real feedback system, not some anonymous survey once a year that I barely look at. I'm talking about regular meetings where anyone can bring up problems or ideas, where we actually talk to each other instead of me just sending down orders from on high. Like a team meeting? Tyler asked. More than that, David said. I want to know what's working and what's not. I want to hear about problems before they become disasters. And I want your ideas. All of you. You're the ones working here every day. You see things I don't see anymore. Rachel leaned forward. Can I say something? Please, David said. The thing your sister told me about, she said slowly, like she was testing the waters. about how you used to know everyone's names and ask about their lives. That's what made this place special. That's what I was hoping to find when I started here." "And you didn't find it," David said. "No," Rachel admitted. "I mean, Linda's great. She remembers I have a cat and asks about him. She helped me figure out the health insurance forms when I had no idea what I was doing. But it feels like she's doing it all alone, you know? Like she's trying to keep that spirit alive by herself." David felt that hit him right in the chest. Linda had been carrying the torch while he'd been too busy to notice. How had he let it get this bad? "When I first opened this place," David said, "I used to know everyone who worked here, not just their names but their stories, their hopes, their struggles, what they were working toward. And I knew the regular customers too. I knew that Robert always sat by the window with his newspaper because he was lonely after his wife passed. I knew that the nurse who rushes in every morning was saving up to go back to school. I knew these things because I was here and I paid attention." He paused, feeling the weight of what he'd lost. "Somewhere in the past year I convinced myself that knowing the numbers was the same as knowing the business, that as long as the profits looked good and we were growing, everything must be fine. But I was wrong." "So what happens now?" Tyler asked. "I mean, you're here today and that's great. But you've got 2 other locations. You can't be everywhere at once." It was a fair question, and it was the question David had been wrestling with since he sat down at that corner table. "You're right," David said. "I can't be everywhere, but I can be somewhere. I'm committing to working at this location 2 full days every week. Not in the back office, not just dropping by, actually working. Behind the counter, making drinks, talking to customers, being present." "Won't that mess up your schedule with the other places?" Linda asked. "Probably," David admitted. "But that's okay, because I'm realizing that maybe I expanded too fast. Maybe I should have made sure the foundation was solid before building higher." He stood up and walked to the small window that looked out into the shop. A customer was approaching the counter, where a young barista he barely knew was working the afternoon shift. "I'm also going to start rotating through all the locations," he continued. "1 month here, 1 month at the second shop, 1 month at the third. Really getting to know everyone again, understanding what each place needs." "That's a lot of time away from the business side of things," Linda pointed out. David turned back to face them. "Maybe. Or maybe it is the business side of things. Maybe I've been confusing paperwork and expansion with actually running a business. Real business is about people. It always has been." Tyler was quiet for a moment, then said, "My business management professor would probably disagree with you. She's all about efficiency and systems and scaling up." "Your professor isn't wrong," David said. "Those things matter, but they're not the whole picture. I learned that the hard way today." He sat back down. "Besides, you know what the most efficient system is? One where your employees actually want to be there, where they care about doing good work because they feel valued. That's the kind of efficiency you can't put in a spreadsheet." Rachel smiled for the first time since they'd sat down. "So, we're really going to do this? Make changes?" "We're really going to do this," David confirmed. "But I need your help. All of you. I need you to call me out when I start slipping back into old habits. I need you to tell me when something isn't working, even if you think it's small. Especially if you think it's small, because those small things add up." "What about the pay thing?" Tyler asked, then immediately looked like he regretted it. "Sorry, You mentioned Sterling Coffee pays more and..." "Don't apologize," David said. "It's a fair question. Here's the truth. I honestly didn't know they were paying $18 an hour. I thought I was being competitive with the market. But clearly I need to do better research. I can't match 18 immediately, but I can bump everyone up to 16 starting next week, and I'll commit to reviewing wages every 6 months to make sure we're staying competitive." Tyler's jaw dropped. "Wait, really?" "Really," David said. "You were right about one thing you said earlier. You all are keeping this place running. You deserve to be paid fairly for that." Linda was making notes furiously on her phone. "David, I'm not trying to be negative here, but that's a significant increase across all 3 locations. Are you sure the business can handle it?" It was a good question, the responsible question, the kind of question David would have asked himself a year ago. Honestly, David said, I'm not totally sure, but I'm sure of this. If I lose this business, because I chose to pay people fairly and treat them right, then I'm okay with that. I'd rather fail doing the right thing than succeed by cutting corners on the people who make it all possible. The room was quiet again, but this time it felt different. Less tense. More like everyone was processing something important. Are we really going to turn this around? Rachel asked softly. David looked at her, then at Tyler, then at Linda. 3 people who'd been trying their best in a system he'd made harder than it needed to be. I don't know, he said honestly. But I'm going to try, and I'm hoping you'll all stick around to help me figure it out. 6 months later, David stood behind the counter during the Tuesday morning rush, and it felt like coming home. Large oat milk latte for Patricia, he called out, sliding the cup across the counter with a smile. The woman who grabbed it was one of his regulars, someone he'd reconnected with over the past few months. Thanks, David. How's your mom doing? Did she like the book I recommended? She loved it, David said, already starting the next order. She called me 3 times to talk about the ending. You've created a monster. Patricia laughed and headed to her usual table by the window. 6 months ago, David couldn't have told you her name. Now he knew she was a retired teacher, loved mystery novels, and had 2 grown kids living across the country. The morning rush had that same familiar energy it always did. But something was different now. Better. The 2 people working alongside him, Tyler and Rachel, moved with a confidence and ease that came from feeling valued. They joked with customers, remembered orders, and handled problems without that exhausted, defeated look they'd had before. Hey boss, Tyler said, bumping David's shoulder as he reached for the milk steamer. We're running low on the vanilla syrup. Want me to grab some from the back? I'll get it, David said. You handle the register. I think Mrs. Chen is next in line and she always asks about your classes. Tyler grinned and moved to the counter. David watched for just a second as Tyler greeted the elderly woman with genuine warmth, asking about her grandkids. This was what he'd been missing. This connection, this sense of community, this feeling that everyone here actually cared. The repair guy had fixed the freezer that same day, 6 months ago. It had taken David 3 phone calls and agreeing to pay a rush fee, but it was done. That was the easy part. The harder part was rebuilding trust, changing systems, and staying committed to being present even when it felt inconvenient. But he'd done it. They'd done it, really, all of them together. As David headed to the back room for supplies, he passed the bulletin board they'd put up 3 months ago. It was covered with photos of staff events, customer appreciation days, and handwritten notes. There was a picture from Tyler's 20th birthday when they'd surprised him with a cake. Another one from the community cleanup day they'd organized. A thank you card from a customer whose laptop had died in the shop, and Rachel had let her use the office computer to finish an important project. This was what Brew and Bean was supposed to be. This was the dream. Linda came out of the office as David grabbed the syrup. Hey, got a minute? She asked, always. What's up? Just got off the phone with the distributor. They're offering us a discount if we increase our order, but it would require more storage space. Wanted to run it by you before deciding. David smiled. 6 months ago, Linda would have just made that decision and hoped it worked out, too worried about bothering him with details. Now they actually communicated. What do you think? He asked. You know our storage situation better than I do. Honestly, I think we could make it work if we reorganize the back room. Tyler's been saying we waste a lot of space with the current setup. He actually drew up a plan if you want to see it. Tyler drew up a plan? Linda nodded, looking pleased. He's been taking that business management stuff seriously. Between your weekly sessions and his classes, I think we're creating a monster. In a good way, David laughed. Tyler's shadowing sessions had turned into something more. The kid had a natural head for business, and he wasn't shy about suggesting improvements. Last month, his idea about restructuring the loyalty program had increased repeat customers by 15%. Let's look at the plan after the rush, David said. If it makes sense, we'll do it. Sounds good. Oh, and don't forget, team meeting at 3. Right. The weekly team meeting. Another change that had made a huge difference. Every Tuesday at 3, everyone who could make it gathered to discuss what was working, what wasn't, and what they could do better. It wasn't always comfortable. Sometimes people disagreed. Sometimes David had to hear things he didn't want to hear, but it was real and it was honest and it kept them all on the same page. David headed back to the counter with the syrup. The morning rush was starting to thin out, which meant they were entering his favorite part of the day. That quiet period where he could actually talk to people instead of just taking orders. An older man approached the counter, someone David didn't recognize. "What can I get for you?" David asked. "Just a black coffee, medium," the man said, then paused. "Are you the owner?" David felt a small flutter of nervousness. That question could go either way. "I am. David, nice to meet you. I'm Robert. I've been coming here for years since you first opened. Used to sit by that window every morning." David looked closer and suddenly recognized him. Robert, the lonely widower who read his newspaper every day. "Robert, of course. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I've seen you." "How have you been?" Robert's face lit up. "You remember me?" "Of course I do. You always ordered a small black coffee and sat by the window. You told me once about your wife, how she loved the pastries here." Robert's eyes got a little misty. "I can't believe you remember that. I stopped coming about a year ago. The atmosphere had changed and it just didn't feel the same anymore. But my neighbor told me it was different now, that it felt like the old days again, so I thought I'd give it another try." David felt his chest tighten. Robert was one of the people he'd lost along the way, one of the connections he'd let slip through his fingers. "I'm really glad you came back," David said quietly, "and I'm sorry we lost our way for a while. That was on me." "Well," Robert said, looking around the shop with approval, "seems like you found it again. This feels like the place I remember, feels like home." David made Robert's coffee himself, waving off his money. "First one's on the house. Welcome back." As Robert headed to his old spot by the window, Tyler leaned over. "That was nice. Who is he?" "Someone I should never have forgotten about," David said. "Remind me to add him to the regular customer list. And find out if he still likes those cranberry scones." "On it," Tyler said, making a note on his phone. Rachel finished helping a customer and joined them behind the counter. "So I have a question." "Shoot," David said. "My roommate is looking for a job. She's got restaurant experience and she's reliable. Any chance we're hiring?" 6 months ago, David would have directed her to send a resume through the website. Now he said, "Have her come by during my shift tomorrow. I'd like to meet her." "If you vouch for her, that means something," Rachel beamed. "Really? That's awesome. She's going to be so excited." The afternoon passed in that comfortable rhythm David had missed so much. He made drinks, chatted with customers, helped Tyler work through a difficult conversation with the upset customer, and showed Rachel a more efficient way to clean the espresso machine. At 3 o'clock, they closed for 30 minutes for the team meeting. It was something that had worried David at first, losing that business time. But he'd learned that a connected, engaged team was worth more than an extra $100 in afternoon sales. 8 people gathered around pushed-together tables. David had sandwiches delivered from the deli next door. Everyone had something to bring up, from small issues to bigger ideas. "The bathroom soap dispenser is broken again," one of the evening shift workers mentioned. "I'll add it to the maintenance list," Linda said, writing it down. "I think we should do another community event," Rachel suggested. "The last one brought in so many new customers and it just felt good, you know? Being part of the neighborhood." "I like that," David said. "Any ideas what kind of event?" They spent 20 minutes brainstorming, everyone contributing. It felt messy and chaotic and absolutely perfect. This was how it was supposed to work. Not one person at the top making all the decisions, but a real team figuring things out together. As the meeting wrapped up and people headed back to work, Tyler hung back. "Hey, David, got a second?" "Sure, what's up?" Tyler looked nervous, which was unusual for him these days. "So I've been thinking. I'm graduating in December and I was wondering, is there any chance I could stay on full-time? Maybe in a management role or something? I know you've got Linda and I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes, but I really love working here and—" "Tyler," David interrupted with a smile. "I was actually going to talk to you about that next week. We're opening a 4th location in January and it needs a manager, someone who understands what we're trying to build here, someone who cares about people as much as profits. You interested?" Tyler's face went through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. "Are you serious?" You'd trust me to manage a whole location? I'd trust you to run all of them if I needed to, David said honestly. You've learned fast, you care about this place, and most importantly, you'll remember what it feels like to be the person behind the counter. You won't forget to listen because you know what it's like not to be heard. Tyler looked like he might cry. I don't know what to say. Say yes, David suggested. And then let's sit down next week to talk about what you need from me to be successful. Training, support, authority to make decisions. I'm not going to make the same mistakes with the new location that I made here. Yes, Tyler said immediately. Absolutely yes. As Tyler went back to work, practically bouncing with excitement, David took a moment to just look around his coffee shop.